to talk through a few aspects of landscape, seascape visibility with you. My name's David Miller, and I'm the Knowledge Exchange Coordinator at the James Hutton Institute. This is in collaboration with a number of organisations, but in particular SAMS and Open. The nature of change in coastal areas will not be of any surprise to you. Wherever you originate from, you'll have examples relating to that. You'll be able to point to where change is dramatic or where it's been quite subtle. Overall, around at least the Scottish coast, there are some changes which, had we been walking down the street, maybe with placards at changes in the Forth with respect to a rail bridge, we might have had a different perspective to viewing its iconic status today. Maybe or maybe not, that will be the view of other aspects of change around the coastline, whether it be non-carbon or carbon extracting technologies or aquaculture and fish farming. The changes then within our seascapes and landscapes are part of the experiences of those landscapes, or they contribute to the experiences of those areas. And what I'd like to do is run through a few elements of the contributions of analysis of visibility to that, and I'll provide a bit of a context at the beginning and then at the end, and some examples to which reference has already been made actually earlier on this morning. So I want to observe that public policy is quite strong at present in Europe and in Scotland in particular on spatial planning, land use strategy, marine planning strategies, and aspects of exploring the role of ecosystem approaches, and at moments when one can intervene, modify an action, or at least look to have some adaptive management of the area, reflecting public preferences as well as broader, wider societal demands and expectations. One amongst many models relating to ecosystem approach is on the screen, identifying what the issue is, characterising scenarios and evaluation in cursory short. And what I want to just look at is one element of characterising the area and the systems. And those characterisations might include the current uses and future uses of sea and land, habitats or socio and economic factors, cultural services, and just one element of that would be the visual landscape. And I want to use some of the background work which had been done by myself but other colleagues primarily on visual concepts, looking at the elements that contribute towards landscapes and just what one might use to articulate some of these. And at this moment I might just opt out and observe that a key driver of this work was another former colleague, former because they passed away recently, Gary Fry from Norway, a former member of staff at SNH, and more recently in Norway for the last 20 years, was one of our key drivers behind this research on the development of landscape concepts, and he passed away a fortnight ago. And the elements of this that we're interested in are what sort of contribution our analysis of seascape and an analysis of landscape content might make towards understanding and articulating changes in landscapes and seascapes with respect to some of these sorts of concepts. And the concepts here, of which there are 9, I just pick out a few, are interpretations of what we see, what we're surrounded by, and how that might be represented as indicators, and what one might measure and input to the interpretation of these indicators back up through various concepts. And it's a question relating to those that I'll finish off with in a few minutes. So what are the indicators that might be of most significance with respect to seascapes? And the slides I'm going to run with over the next few moments are just some of the baseline data of visual landscape, some of the rerunning of previous analysis, and reference to analysis that's been mentioned before. And as per title, this is focusing on the analysis of visibility of our surroundings and our landscapes. I'm going to show some examples for Wales and then just a few images relating to Scotland. Some of you will have seen equivalents of this. Reference has been made to the Marine Organisation's plan for the South area earlier. Mention was made of the work of Newcastle, John Benson and colleagues, for seascape characterisation around Scotland for renewables. In short, what we have here is analysis we did for Countryside Council for Wales when it existed on the visibility of Wales and how one might then begin to identify the granularity of views of the sea, the extent of the views from the sea, and the sorts of distances that might influence those views. And the two punchline outputs from that then are the view of whereabouts from on land can you see the sea, and on the right, whereabouts at sea can you see greater or fewer proportions of the land. And where this begins to come into its own nowadays is in the spatial targeting of change with respect to aquaculture, and certainly feeding in now to offshore marine renewables, part of Scottish Government's thinking, but those of others. And originally in Wales with respect to developments such as marinas and more inshore related activities. Other aspects which go beyond just what's the view is what's the context of the view. If we were onshore, we would think about aspects of open and enclosed landscapes. So likewise, one can do so when thinking about the immediate vicinity of the coastline. On the left, the area within the blue coastal area is the elevation model, and the external area is the level of visibility. On the right-hand side, in essence, the blue areas are where the land surrounding the coast is highest, and the areas which are greener or yellow is where it's lowest. In other words, what one begins to do in the same fashion as one would for other measures of topography is look at degrees of enclosure and then what sort of context does that provide for the locality, for the views into that locality, or potentially for consideration of the experiences in that locality. Now this won't surprise anybody that recognises that Wales is on the west side of the country. There's water north, west and south of it, and therefore if you look west you're going to see the water. But what I wanted to observe here is that when you look at the visibility of the sea from land and then consider it with respect to a range of characteristics or other elements, distance from various features or iconic landscape types, here just with respect to elevation and aspect, it is when you get further inland and higher up that you get some of the better views of the sea, and therefore the visual envelope of the sea is not just that which is immediately adjacent and in the coast. The contribution that the sea makes to the broader seascapes, and therefore a smaller contribution to the overall landscape, is not measured by a few metres, kilometres inland. It can be substantially further inland and of course substantially higher elevation. So when beginning to think about this in terms of characterizations, what I want to observe is that the consideration of seascape and landscape is a dissolved boundary which spans the coastline. It's that it is a continuum, irrespective of whether it's land or sea. It's just a convenient classification for obvious historical reasons and terminology. But in terms of the contributions to the scape, it is irrespective of land or sea. It's just different components of what's in our surroundings. And so what we've done across Wales and across all of Scotland is look at how this begins to reconsider the way in which we might define certain areas, certain boundaries, certain hotspots for types of development. And similarly with respect to the sorts of metrics we might measure, and this is not yet taken through to any sort of model aspect, what sort of metrics might we take with respect to the contribution of the coastal fringe? So that around Wales allows us to, or rather what we've done is to look at the contribution of the coastal area to views further inland and begin to map out those areas at different distances so that we can look at the spatial arrangement of views around the area broadly within 12 to 15 kilometres of the coast of Wales, and in this case it relates to the 10 kilometre viewing distance, but the length of the coastline is another metric. So I present that not because we've yet exploited the metric within an algorithm, but rather to observe that there are different elements of the coast which in themselves from the literature contribute different aspects to the character of the area, which no doubt have contributed different elements to our experiences, which we can begin to express spatially and across broad geographic areas. And if we move further north and to closer to home, at least in terms of distance from Edinburgh, a few images from related work which we then exploit within Scotland, which was done originally for Highland Council, Moray Council and Scottish Natural Heritage. And it's to observe that the areas of water which are coastal contribute to the views from hotels, settlements, our Corbetts or Munros, our mountain or hill peaks, our transport routes. So the experience of the seascapes is while we move, while we're static, while we get to that static point. It contributes in many of the different ways that any other aspect of our landscape would contribute. And so when thinking about the contribution of seascapes to the broader landscape change, we need to think about it as one component part. And that component part is under considerable renewed pressures. So as I started off with, in relation to pressures on coastal areas, here on the right, areas of search for renewables, over on the left, combinations of different visual receptors, so places from which one might view or be able to view the seascapes, and therefore the contribution of change in some of these areas of search might well be seen and therefore potentially experienced much further away from the coast than one might originally anticipate. So I'm going to close then with a couple of observations. One is that our planning onshore has evolved in various ways to develop strategic plans. Do those necessarily match up with the strategic plans offshore? Are we in sync or not? Is the expansion plans of Scottish Government for forestry coherent with the impacts of forestry, perhaps, with aquaculture? And I've displayed images to do with views, but actually that's only one very small component part of a whole range of other elements of significance. Seasonal, weather, shadow, and the images I've put on the right-hand side here to do with illumination, sunset, aspects of lighting. And the differences in experience of a coastal environment to the east coast, where you're exposed mainly to the sunrise, and the west coast, where visitors might go and experience predominantly a sunset, is not maybe tested, but certainly of significance potentially, and therefore at the moment excluded from much of the nature of the mapping we do. A bit more of this analysis then is going to be carried on, focusing explicitly at aquaculture, of which there is a great deal on the north and the west coast of Scotland under a new European Union project looking at spatial planning and aquaculture, of which seascapes is a significant part. And there's a poster outside on some of the visualisation aspects of that you're welcome to ask us about in due course if you wish. And with that, thank you very much indeed for your attention. Thanks for being here.